Hello everyone, back tuning into today's second video. We're going to have a look at the weather for next week to 10 days for today's second video. This will take us into the start of November. I think going to around the 3rd or the 4th of November with this. So I'm going to see what's happening in next week, 10 days. We'll also have a look at the Beijing Climate Center for the next 40 days as well. And that takes us, can you believe, into the beginning of December. So the beginning of the official meteorological winter of 2018-19 just coming into view within the 40-day time frame of the Beijing Climate Center. So I'll get on with all that for you in a moment. Just to say that the 5-day forecast has been released. It takes us from today through to Monday. Starting off reasonably quiet and fairly mild at the moment, but we will find weather becoming colder over the weekend. We've been highlighting this over the past few days. Northerly winds on the way. First Arctic blast of the season, and it could bring a little bit of snow up into the northern part of the country as well. Have a look at that and see what you think. So we're going to begin by having a look at what's happening in the stratosphere over the North Pole. We'll be hearing a lot more about this over the next few weeks and months. One of the things that we do keep a close eye on through the winter is temperatures at both 30 and 10 HPA, which is kind of like one of the highest levels of the atmosphere in the stratosphere. When the stratosphere goes cold over the North Pole, and this is a cooling time of year, of course, up over the North Pole, we find that we have an association with a strengthened polar vortex and strengthened westerly zonal flow. When the temperature in the stratosphere over North Pole is warmer, so you have a weakened zonal flow, you have a weakened polar vortex. And one of the things we will be looking for as we get into winter is a sudden stratospheric warming, which I'll talk more about in a moment. Well, this is from the JMA, and this is showing both the trend, which is the grey line just here, and also how temperatures are doing in terms of the temperature at 30 HPA over North Pole, which is indicated by the black line. So we go back to the start of September with this, and you can see that this black line has been sticking very, very close to the grey line up to now. So overall, we've been very close to average with those temperatures in the stratosphere over North Pole up to this point. But just in the past few days, we have started to turn things a little bit colder now, just going a little bit underneath the grey line, underneath the trend line for this point in the year. So this may be associated with a little bit of strengthening of the zonal flow and polar vortex as we get through into the start of November. That's how things are looking at 30 HPA. If we go a little bit higher up to 10 HPA, this is how things are looking. Actually quite a bit colder than average now. So again, the grey line is the trend at 10 HPA, and that's kind of like one of the very, very highest points of the atmosphere and the stratosphere over North Pole. And you can see that this black line, which is this year's temperature, is now a fair few degrees underneath that grey line. So it is turning increasingly cold at 10 HPA in the stratosphere over North Pole at the moment. There are signs that's beginning to move down to 30 HPA as well. So this may well be associated with a strengthening of the polar vortex as we get through into the beginning of November. It will be interesting to see if we see a stratospheric response within the troposphere, which is the boundary layer of the atmosphere where weather is taking place. If we see a response to this cooling of the stratosphere over North Pole. Now, say one of the things we're going to be looking for through the winter is a sudden stratospheric warming. So what happens with that is the black line will be at this sort of level, or anywhere around the grey line or underneath it, and then all of a sudden within just a few days you'll find that we shoot up and go to something like that. That sort of level with the black line, and when that happens, it always looks very dramatic. When that happens, that will be a sudden stratospheric warming, and when that happens, it can be associated with an increased risk of blocking over the North Pole if that warming gets down into the troposphere, sets up high pressure over North Pole, and that pushes the cold air out of the pole and down into mid-latitudes. So before a lot of our coldest spells, one of the things that we tend to see a week or two before is a sudden stratospheric warming of the North Pole. Last time this happened was back before the beast from the east, back in February, of course. This is how things are looking with the GFS at the moment in terms of those temperatures at 10 HPA. We're at the website metrosil.fr for this. So these blue colours here, these are the cold temperatures over pole in the stratosphere. This is how the GFS is forecasting things to develop over the next few days. So staying cold through to the start of November, in fact becoming colder if anything into the start of November with those temperatures in the stratosphere. Let's just quickly run you through to this chart, and this is showing what happened before the beast from the east back in February. So this is what happens when you get a sudden stratospheric warming. You will replace those blue colours, and they'll be replaced by yellows, greens, and if you get a real dramatic warming, such as we see there on the 16th of February over Canada, if that happens, that's a real dramatic warming of the stratosphere over the North Pole. Again, we see how we start off on the 8th of February last year with those blue colours there over North Pole. But see how they're torn apart kind of by those yellow and green colours. That's the warm temperatures infiltrating into the stratosphere, and then the warming became more and more intense. It did turn into a major warming of the stratosphere at North Pole, over North Pole. And this, of course, associated with the high pressure that set up over Scandinavia, which eventually led on to the beast from the east at the end of February. So that's the kind of thing we'll be looking for in the winter. You'll be hearing a lot more about the stratosphere, some stratospheric warmings, all of that kind of thing, as we get into the winter itself. This is something that I saw last night, quite interesting. It was posted to the chat by Siren, and this is a tweet that Siren saw from a forecaster from America, Michael Ventris, and it's showing that the CFS V2, the long-range model, is some of the ensemble members within the CFS V2 are actually forecasting a stratospheric warming to occur in November. Now, that's very unusual. Typically, stratospheric warmings or sudden stratospheric warmings occur later in the winter from around January onwards. So it's very unusual to get a warming of the stratosphere in November. It does happen very rarely, and shouldn't really be saying this, but it did happen in the stratosphere over Canada in November 1962. There was a major warming of the stratosphere over Canada just before that extremely cold winter of 1962-1963. Always dangerous to talk about that winter, of course, because everybody gets very excited, and it's very unlikely that even if we did get a sudden stratospheric warming during November, it would have the same effects that the warming of the stratosphere in November 1962 had. But it's one of the rare examples, anyway, 1962, of a year when we had a warming of the stratosphere over North Pole, but that in particular was over Canadian North Pole. So this is the chart that was on Twitter last night from Michael Ventris. So it shows the observation. So this is what the CFS has been, what we've had with the stratospheric temperature, if you like, going back into August. And then we see here, these are the individual ensemble members going through November. So that's kind of like 7th of November there, that's 17th. That's 27th of November, just there. You see, most of these CFS ensemble members keep things quite cold with the temperature in the stratosphere at 10 HPA. But going up to these ones up here, we do find that those ones are the ones that are the ensemble members that are going for a warming of the stratosphere over the North Pole in the latter stages of November. Now, this is a very long way off, of course. It's a month away, so just have to wait and see whether that verifies or not. But certainly it does appear at the moment that a small number of CFS V2 ensemble members are forecasting quite a significant warming of the stratosphere over North Pole in November, which I say is very unusual. We don't normally get a warming of the stratosphere in November. It's normally something that happens later on in the winter. So we should wait and see how that plays out. Right, so let's come back to the next week to 10 days, and these are the GFS ensembles. The red line here is the 30-year upper air temperature average for Glasgow today. So we're starting off much warmer than average with those upper air temperatures at the moment, although it is fairly chilly actually on the surface. I've had a bit of an inversion underneath these warm upper air temperatures aloft. But from now onwards, basically it's downhill all the way, and here comes the cold snap through to the end of the week. Temperatures are going way below average, going to be much colder than average over the weekend. And then into next week, we're keeping things pretty cold really through particularly the first and middle part of next week. Temperatures stay below average up to the start of November. Now, through the first week of November, which is this point just here, we do see these ensemble members lifting back up towards the red line. So, sort of improvement in the temperature is taking place, a return back to average, although nothing especially mild coming up, and certainly nothing as mild as what we've got at the moment in terms of those upper air temperatures. Becoming more unsettled as well. Plenty of dry weather through the rest of this week and into the weekend, but next week the precipitation spikes are coming back. Bear in mind that's the southwest Scotland, so it's been one of the wettest places in the country. But it is an indication that as we go into the start of November, we're possibly seeing signs of something a little bit more unsettled coming along. Temperature anomalies from the 24th of October to the 1st of November are forecast to be colder than average for the UK and for Ireland. Most of Scandinavia comes out colder than average as well, as does much of France. So clearly in the west of Europe, we've got cold and average temperature anomalies in the week ahead, and warmer than average temperature anomalies are pushed into the east and the southeast of Europe. Precipitation anomalies from the 24th of October to the 1st of November still significantly drier than average through much of the UK. Dry but cold sums it up in the week ahead. This is how the GFS is looking for Saturday then. We're in that northerly flow. This all covered by the 5-day forecast. Of course, it's going to be a cold weekend. So that high pressure topples in and then ridges up to Scandinavia. Through the start of next week, temperatures will be staying quite a bit below average. That's how we look on Tuesday next week. So a real battle is going on within the atmosphere then. We've got this high pressure in up over Scandinavia, but at the same time we've got low pressure in the Atlantic. This low pressure being blocked by the high pressure. There's weather fronts in that sort of position coming up against the high pressure and stalling. So rain in the west, a fair amount of dry weather over in the east through the early part of next week. Into the middle of next week, low pressure just sort of sits around the country in situ over the top of the UK, probably bringing showers, maybe some longer spells of rain as well. So as we go through next week, probably turning increasingly unsettled. We're up to day 10 now, which is Saturday the 3rd of November. Again, you see, still broadly, we're blocking off the Atlantic, so we still have these areas of low pressure in the Atlantic. The jet stream, which is the black line there, is doing something like that. So still generally on that northwest to southeast trajectory across the Atlantic into Europe. And then we still have this hint, anyway, of high pressure up to the north and to the northeast. In the more extended range, this goes on actually. So we find ourselves going up towards Wednesday, the 7th of November, very long way out, 348 hours away. We've still got a battle taking place within the atmosphere there. There's still the high pressure sitting over Scandinavia, but we do also have this low pressure deepening in the Atlantic. So that's starting to turn winds into a milder southerly southwesterly. That pushes up milder air from the Atlantic as we go through to the very end of the GFS run, which is Friday the 9th of November. We've got low pressure to the west, high pressure to the east. We're starting to drag up more of a southerly flow then. So increasingly mild there as we go into the second week of November. I did a video yesterday saying expect unusual weather patterns during November. I think that's still holding true. At times that could bring quite cold conditions, but at times it could also bring very mild conditions as well. It could be one of those funny months where we go from one extreme to another, and that's the kind of thing that the GFS 6 o'clock run was showing this morning. This is also the GFS. This is the GFS parallel run. So at this point in the year, the NOAA, who of course this model belongs to, starts to generate a new version, an upgraded version of the GFS operational run. So this, what we're just looking at, is the GFS operational run. In a few months' time, this will be downgraded to become just a GFS ensemble member, and the parallel run, what we call the parallel run, will sort of take its place and become the operational GFS. This happens every year, that they sort of upgrade the model, add new resolution, higher resolution to the model. And in theory, the model should get more and more reliable year by year as these upgrades take place. So this is the parallel run of the GFS, and next year this will become the operational GFS operational run. So we find that for Saturday again, we're in this northerly wind with the GFS parallel run, bring that cold Arctic air down across the country. Into the start of next week, we take that high pressure up towards Scandinavia, start to block off the Atlantic quite a bit. Into the middle part of next week, so low pressure just sort of meandering around our quadrant of the Atlantic, probably bringing showers, maybe a few longer spells of rain. Quite cool really with the temperatures, because the jet stream is still to our south, so on the cool side of the jet there, albeit it's not overly cold, but probably quite chilly, damp conditions through the course of next week. Going up towards day 10 and beyond, so we keep bringing areas of low pressure in off the Atlantic, but again, not the usual zonal flow, not the usual sort of southwest to northeast flow that we expect to get at this point of the year. Everything looks like it's moving kind of northwest to southeast, which, as I say, it's a little bit different to what we tend to get when we bring the weather in from off the Atlantic. And it means that overall temperatures will probably stay relatively cool through that first week of November. We're going a very long way out now. We're up to the end of the GFS parallel run, and we're at Friday the 9th of November. You see, still these sort of unusual patterns are continuing. We still have the high pressure more or less over Scandinavia. It's still kind of ridging to the north of the UK with low pressure underneath it. This low pressure probably bringing showers or longer spells of rain. But the main point is that the weather patterns continue to be rather different. Certainly not the normal zonal type situation that we expect at this point of the year. And that's despite the fact that temperatures in the stratosphere over North Pole are cooling down and will probably be strengthening the polar vortex, or trying to strengthen the polar vortex a little bit. East MWF looks like that. Saturday, northerly winds coming down across the country, and then inside of next week, there's high pressure building up over Scandinavia, trying to block off the Atlantic. We do actually pull in a real easterly there on Tuesday next week. If this was about 4 to 6 weeks on, that would be a very cold easterly wind indeed, and that would be bringing quite a lot of snow in with it. Of course, it's only the 30th of October, so no snow, just cool, damp, rather unpleasant conditions really being brought in with that easy wind. And feeling cold, of course, particularly on the east coast. Into the second half of next week, so eventually we start to move the weather in from off the Atlantic. It's all rather slow and sluggish doing it. That's how we finish up day 10 with the ECMWF, Saturday 3rd of November, bringing this low pressure in from the Atlantic. So a little bit more of an Atlantic flow there by day 10, although it looks like very quickly we will probably push that low pressure through to the east. It would go in that sort of direction, and we'd start to pull the winds down from the northwest on its backside once again. Overall, these weather patterns for the first week of November are looking a little bit untypical of what we tend to expect at this point of the year. Finally, we'll just have a look at the charts of Beijing Climate Center for the next 40 days. So these are 500 below our heights. So broken down into 10-day periods. The first 10-day period will take us from the 26th of October through to the 4th of November, with below average heights out to the northeast of the country. Let's change the colour. Above average heights in the middle of the Atlantic, sending the flow on that northwest southeast trajectory. So a reasonable amount of dry weather, but quite cool. For the north anyway, quite unsettled up there. Then we go through to week 2, which is the 5th through to the 14th of November. Above average heights ridging through the middle of the Atlantic and hinting at going up towards Greenland, with below average heights to the northeast of the country. That again probably bringing down a northwesterly type flow, so rather cool conditions there through the first half of November. A change takes place in the next 10-day period, the 15th to 24th of November, builds a ridge up over and to the east of the UK with below average heights in the middle of the Atlantic. A lot of dry and quiet weather there. That's probably bringing in the air from a southerly to southeasterly direction, so it could be relatively warm, but of course if that high pressure is centred over the top of the country, then it will actually be potentially quite cold. You might get an inversion going on, producing frost and fog. And then we go through to the final 10-day period. This one takes us from the 25th of November to the 4th of December. So just into the very beginning of winter 2018-19, and we see that we have a ridge of above average heights again in the middle of the Atlantic, with below average heights, if anything, centred just a little bit to the east of the country, east of Scotland, Scandinavia, North Sea. And so this looks like it's probably pulling the wind in from a northwesterly, or possibly even a northerly. We might even be pulling wind in from the north there, which would be, of course, a cold end to November and a cold start to December and a cold start to winter 2018-19. That's a really long way off, but overall it does look as though these unusual weather patterns are set to continue. The Beijing Climate Center is right. We see no real sign of a strong sort of area of low pressure around Iceland, a strong zonal flow. We see no real indication of that. Looks like there's a lot of high pressure through the northern Atlantic, a lot of northwest southeasterly type flow, similar to what the shorter range models we're just looking at are showing for the first week of November. Really nothing desperately cold showing up, I have to say, but nothing particularly mild either, and not the usual westerly, southwesterly zonality that we would tend to expect in November. So looks like these unusual patterns are set to continue through November, as we said in yesterday's video, and of course the detail on that is what we've got to finalise over the coming few days. All about the Beijing Climate Centre's high perspective. Coming back to the weather for the next week to 10 days, it looks like we're going to have, well, definitely going to have a cold snap over the weekend. Looks like next week, certainly the first half of next week, going to be quite chilly, and then probably turning a little bit less cold the second half of next week. But overall, a lot of sort of sluggish weather patterns, low pressure close to the country next week, which will bring showers, longer spells of rain, maybe increasingly so through the course of next week. And overall, I suspect temperatures will be a little bit depressed. Right, tomorrow we'll do it all over again and have a look at weather for next week to 10 days. Then don't forget to check out the 5-day forecast if you haven't yet done so. That's all for now, and thanks for watching.